Welcome to
Just a Bit Outside.
Today we're going to talk about Funny Stories Part 3. This might be a little bit different from the first two, but the purpose of this is all the people that I've known, including myself, that have lost people. You know, you have to go through the grieving process. However, one of the things I've always felt strongly was that you learn to grieve with it by laughter. You remember the good things that happened. You try to remember all the great things that made the relationship with this person special or funny or whatever. So I figured, okay, I'm going to do funny stories, and this is also going to be funny and interesting stories. So I wanted to just tell a few other stories that I had for you. Incidentally, I spoke last week about Beth Derwin. I had said that she had passed away from cancer after dealing with all the issues with her appendix, excuse me. So it actually turned out it was ALS. Thank you, Paul, for letting me know give me the correction. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Jeff Pratt. I had mentioned him in the last video. I did want to tell you that there was a time that Robert Goulet, the celebrity, had come into this Hyatt that I'd worked with him at. Somebody actually dared him to call him Bob. And that's exactly what happened. He was in the hotel. Jeff came up and said, "Hello, Mr. Goulet," and he said something to the effect of, "Hello, how are you?" And he's like, "Well, Bob," and the story he told me was that it was like, "What did you say?" And it all went downhill from there. The funny thing is that a few years later, I mentioned this to somebody that had been my boss there with Jeff, was working there also, and I remember telling him this story that I'd heard. He goes, "I remember that." So he was there when this all happened, and it definitely blew up in Jeff's face. I want to talk a little bit about my dad also. It dawned on me, I really had a lot of things I could talk about with my dad. Now, I love my dad. He was a really, really good person. He taught me a lot of really good values. Now, he definitely told me some stories over the year. He told me about being in Guam one time. He said there was some tremors, and he said he looked down at this bar floor. He was in some kind of bar, and he said he watched this crack just go across the bar. He told me another time of being in that same place where a guy walked in with a big, huge beer gut, came up like this, lifted it up, plopped it on the table, and shouted, "Fill her up!" But he also told me a story. If many of you remember the stories, I can't remember what the name of the TV show was. It was one of those outdoor type channels. The guys in Mississippi that actually went out after catfish, and they would catch them with their bare hands. Well, my dad told me he did that about 3 times. And he said, like, you literally would go up underneath the bank where they would be swimming a lot of times. You just jam your arm up there in its throat and just pull it up. He told me after about the 3rd time, he gave up on that. He said it was just way too painful. They had teeth, and he did not like the pain. So, but he was also used to being around rivers, because in West Virginia, you have the Guyandotte River right near where he lived. And I know he told me about my grandfather. He would teach his kids to swim by pushing them off the cliff. Sink or swim. And he said they learned to swim in a hurry. But one of the things I do remember was he told me a story about when he was stationed in Thailand. Now, back in the 1970s, when I was about 10 years old, he got sent to Thailand for a year. So literally, my family went a year without seeing my dad. And he told me this story about a guy. Now, actually, it was several guys. He was back then, before he went into computers, he was doing supply for the Air Force. This was while Vietnam was winding down. However, being close to there, he told me about, like, every day he'd watch a U-2 spy plane take off, and it'd do like this until it disappeared into the sky. But one of the things he always remembered was that where he was, there were a lot of guys that he was working with in supply, that's the key part there, that they had their own little businesses. And so what happens is, I'm sure there's a lot of falsified paperwork in there. And he told me they all had this little business of their own, and they were making money. For some reason, the Thais loved buying aluminum. He didn't know why, but he said they loved buying it. And now there was one guy with him. This was pretty much the guy in charge of them all. He was the chief master sergeant. And he told me this guy had his own business, but he had the biggest business in the mall. He got caught. The Air Force caught him, and they put him to a court-martial. Now, this is probably about 1974 when this happened, maybe 1975. He was court-martialed when he got caught. Well, he beat the court-martial. My dad told me, remember, 1974 dollars. He spent $3,000 just on the party to celebrate beating the court-martial. So that's probably like $20,000 today. I'm not sure what the exact translation would be, but I'll put it up on the screen. So he definitely had some stories to tell. Now, my grandfather, by the same token, he had some interesting stories with him. Now, one of the things I remember with him was him and my grandmother. Now, back then, West Virginia, you call him Papa, you call him Mama. Those of you in Texas, you call him Pawpaw or Mima. I remember that. But he lived next to the railroad tracks. So, you know, when you're a kid, I remember we used to count the number of cars or the trains that would go by. We loved playing around the tracks. There was a general store nearby. There was also a river, the Guyandotte River that went through. And I just have a lot of fond memories of this little town that he lived in. Now, one of the things I found funny was that I found his draft papers on Ancestry.com years and years ago. And I showed this on a computer to my dad, like, look at this. This is his draft papers. Well, what happened, I'm sorry, draft registration. Let me correction, draft registration. So what happened was, he did get drafted. My dad told me that it was in 1918 he got drafted. So what happened was, he had to report someplace for basic training. So he goes there to get on, I'm assuming the train. He told me the station, so I'm assuming it had to be a train station. He gets there, well, right when he reached this station, the announcement came out, World War I had just ended. He was getting ready to go ship out for basic to go to World War I. He hears the news that the war is over when he reports for this train. He turned around and went back home. Never went to the Army. Nobody ever said anything. He just went back home and lived his life out. So there is one other story I want to tell, and this was a famous person who has since passed also. But this was in Virginia Beach, Virginia, when I was working at a hotel called the Founders Inn. Now, what happened was, I was bellman at this hotel. They tell me, Jeff, you have a check-in. So I'm checking in this lady, got to take her to another building, and we start talking. It's an older blonde lady, about her 50s. I'm probably about 30 at this point. And I'm checking her in, and I just keep thinking, I know this person. I know this person. Where do I know this person from? So anyway, we get to this room, and I'm, unloading her suitcases and, getting everything set up with the room, and I'm talking to her. And what happened was, I'm asking, I just had to ask her, because I noticed she had a definite accent. So I said, where are you from? She goes, I'm from Los Angeles. I said, no. I said, you may live in Los Angeles. I said, you're not from Los Angeles, so where are you from? She goes, I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Well, I had a friend that was from that part of Louisiana. I had met her mother just a few months before. Her mother made red beans and rice for us, and I learned a lot about Cajun culture in Louisiana. So we talked for a good 20 minutes of just about Cajun culture. And this woman was just really fun to talk to. Whole time I'm sitting there thinking, I know her from somewhere, but I have no clue. So finally, I have to go back to the bell stand. I wish her luck, and I tell her it was great meeting her. I go back to the bell stand, and I come to find out it was Donna Douglas, Ellie Mae Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies. And I'm like, wait a minute, I never got her autograph, Anyway, needless to say, I never saw her again. Sadly, she's since passed since then. So I hope you enjoyed these stories. I wanted to just maybe brighten somebody's day. If you enjoyed these stories and you have any stories of your own, I'd like to tell some in the future of other people. So email me justabitoutside2@gmail.com, and I will definitely be glad to air your stories. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe to this video and this channel, and ring the bell if you want notifications of future videos. And I also have a history channel called Footprints in American History. Please check it out. It's lesser known American history that's designed for the layman to make history fun and interesting. I hope in the meantime you guys have a great day.
Just a bit outside.